What's going on, everybody? Tyler Vincent here, aka Homebuyer Tyler. We're in an interesting market right now where we've had the crazy interest rate hike over the past 6 months or so. I know on the last refi I just tried to do, we got quoted like 8.5% interest and 10% interest on another option, which is just crazy. So rentals are getting harder to cash flow. You got buyers who have adjusted their expectations. They've dropped the prices that they're buying at. Yet sellers, especially off market, which is mostly who we deal with, sellers, their expectations are still really high on price. Um, it's an interesting spot when you're trying to buy something from a seller off market and then sell to a buyer on the back end where there's just that gap where sellers are higher and buyers are lower. So just trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. And what we've found is that seller financing is one of the most effective ways to do that. If you're trying to build wealth, get off the hamster wheel, get financial freedom, ultimately build up your passive monthly cash flow, your passive income. Seller financing today is more important than it ever has been before, I would argue. So in this presentation today, what we're going to be going over is keeping it simple, how to keep it simple, stupid, how to do less with more using creative financing. Seller financing specifically. A little bit of background on this presentation. I'm part of a mastermind with 130 of the top real estate investors in the entire country. What they do is they split you into 4 different rooms, and so there's about 30 people per room, give or take. And everybody gives a presentation. At the end of the presentation, everyone votes on which one's the best one. During my first conference, I gave this presentation and I was awarded the belt. I got it right here. There it goes right there. So I figured, if I presented to the top investors in the nation, I figured, hey, a lot of people would probably be able to get value from this, especially in today's market. So without further ado, let's dive into this. We need to begin with understanding who our prospect is. Who is this seller? Like, what is their motivation? If this is somebody who needs cash now, like if they're going through pre-foreclosure, or if they need this money from the sale to buy their next house or something to that effect, like they need the proceeds from it right away, then they're not going to be a fit, right? Like they're not going to be a fit for taking payments over a period of time. So really what we're listening for is, for one, we want to know if the property is owned free and clear, right? Meaning like there's no mortgage on the house. So then we can do seller financing. If there was a mortgage, we would try to get it subject to, which is something we can do on a different video. Don't need to do it on this one. We're just focusing on seller financing, which is with free and clear houses. So what we're listening for are those people that are like, I'm not just going to give the house away. I'm not pressed to sell it. I want to sell it, but I don't have to sell it. Like, I'm sure this is resonating with a lot of you. I know it does for us. Like, we get a lot of these types of leads. And a lot of people are just throwing them away. They're just throwing them away. This is how we convert at a very high level. So when we start to hear those types of phrases, I take off like the we buy houses hat. I throw that away. The one that we're buying houses at 60, 70 cents on the dollar. And instead I switch over to, I put on a different hat, and it's like, we work with people who want to sell, but they don't necessarily have to sell. So that's literally what I tell the seller. I'm like, look, we're not like most investors that you're going to speak with. A lot of times, like the people that we work with, they don't have to sell it. They're not in a position where they have to do anything. They just want to sell it. And then I expand on that and I say, the sellers that we work with, a lot of times, like, they don't need the money on day one. Instead, they just simply want to net the most that they possibly can out of the sale. So stop, pause real quick, and just think about, how is that seller going to respond to those statements? So when they hear like that we work with people who want to sell but don't have to sell, they're going to identify with that, right? Well, yeah, I don't have to sell either. I want to sell, but I don't have to. I'm not pressed. Perfect. Okay. Second piece of that, we work with sellers who don't need the money on day one. This is an ego play, right? Because most of the people that hear this, they're going to say, well, I don't need the money on day one either. Okay, perfect, right? Then the final piece of this is people that want to net the most out of the sale. Most of the people that you speak with want to net the most that they can out of the sale of their home. So they hear these 3 things and they're going to be like, huh, yeah, I mean, that sounds like me. Okay, what do you have to say, right? So we've got them to where they're willing to listen to it. What do we do next? let's start with what not to do. And this is what I used to always do. I would ask, well, what terms would you like to see? I mean, most sellers don't even know what terms are. They don't understand seller financing. They don't understand creative financing. So asking them what terms they would like to see it, they have no clue. So that was a terrible question. Well, how much of a down payment would you be looking for? A lot of times they don't know that you're supposed to give a down payment. Like, why are we introducing a battle that doesn't need to be fought? So I would do that. And so they're like, oh, I don't know, $50,000 sounds great, right? I don't know, just crazy stuff. What interest rate? A lot of times they don't know that there needs to be an interest rate. They hear on the news that people are charging 8%, 10%, right? I want 8 or 10% interest too. How long will it be amortized? Most of them don't know what amortization is. They don't know what it means amortized. What length for a balloon payment? They don't know what a balloon payment is. Like, it's just, they're just silly questions. I was introducing battles that I was assuming I was going to have to fight. Didn't have to fight them. So instead, this is where we need to keep it simple, right? All we do is we just agree on 3 things. First is a purchase price. Second is a monthly payment. And third is a timeline. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, all we do is we make you the agreed upon monthly payment until we cash you out for the agreed upon purchase price on or before the end of the timeline that we agree on. By the way, throughout this period of time, we take on any and all responsibilities that have to do with the property. So that's taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance, management of the tenant, any kind of evictions, anything that you can think of. From your perspective, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you kick your feet up, you relax, and it's just mailbox money for you. You just collect a check every single month. Some objections might come up. Well, how much are you going to put down? That's a common one. That's probably the most common one. As soon as I hear that question, we don't do down payments, right? Very assertive, very confident, not aggressive, just confident to where it's like, I'm not going to entertain that negotiation. No, we don't do down payments. And I remind them who we typically work with. So the sellers that we typically work with, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, are people that they don't necessarily need the money on day one. Instead, they're more interested in netting the most they can out of the sale, right? So instead of doing a down payment, by eliminating the down payment, we can raise that purchase price a lot more. Listen to what they have to say. A lot of times the ego kicks in. Well, yeah, I don't need the money on day one either. Okay, great. And they want to net the most that they can. Okay, awesome. We'll tack that onto the back end on the purchase price. Other major objection is, well, what's the interest rate? Kind of the same exact thing. I point them back to the sellers that we typically work with, the people that they want to net the most they can out of the sale. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you want an interest rate, that's fine. We can do that. But please understand that the purchase price, the timeline, and the monthly payment all kind of work in tandem, right? So if we were to build in an interest rate, we can do it. I have no problem doing it. But now we would have to lower the purchase price. Now you're reporting interest income on your taxes and you're paying taxes on it. What I like to do, or at least not even myself, but like the sellers that we typically work with that don't need the money on day one and they just want to net the most that they can, is we just leave interest out of the equation. So now that they're not reporting interest income. And when we leave interest out of the equation, we can raise the purchase price. So at the end of the day, they're going to net more money. But again, I'll leave that ball in your court, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. That's what that negotiation looks like. I wanted to include a quick case study here. All right, so this was a seller who he was an elderly guy. He's retired. He was an out-of-state landlord, so he lived in Florida. This property was in a different state. And he actually spent his career as an appraiser. When he first reached out to us, he was yelling. He was basically yelling at us. Like, it was almost like a do not call borderline. It was like, look, market value, or don't ever contact me again. Don't waste my time. All this kind of stuff, like yelling at us over the phone. Well, I called him and he kind of repeated the same message again. Listen, don't waste my time. I used to be an appraiser. I know how much this house is worth and I'm not going to take a penny less. So like if you're thinking about trying to get like a lowball offer or anything like that, like just hang up, save our time. So what I did was the exact line that I mentioned earlier. Like as soon as I heard this stuff, I kind of knew how to, I took off my We Buy Houses hat and I put on the other one, right? Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller. Listen, I know this sounds crazy, and honestly, I understand you reacting the way you do. I'm sure it's frustrating to get all these lowball offers from investors. But I just want you to understand that we don't operate like most investors. We typically work with people that want to sell, but they don't necessarily have to sell. We work with people that don't need the money on day one. They just want to net the most that they possibly can out of the sale. He lets his guard down and actually starts to speak. You could hear the change in his voice. Come to find out, we start to get into motivation a little bit. This is a property he inherited from his parents with his brother a number of years ago. This was probably like 12 years ago that he inherited it with his brother. He bought his brother out, so now it's just him. And it's just a headache for him every single time he gets a call from the tenants or anytime he has to get work done to the property, because he was actually driving from Florida back to the house in a different state to get all this work done, which is just crazy. So what he told me is like, look, I'm retired. I really do like the monthly income. I can't stand being a landlord, to be honest with you. This was easy, right? It almost fell like right into the lap. So I start to introduce the idea of seller financing. And I tell the guy, I said, well, look, it sounds to me like you don't have to sell it. And you're more interested in netting the most out of the sale that you possibly can. And you don't need the money today. He's like, that's right. Okay, great. Well, sir, I might be able to meet your price if you would consider selling it on terms. The inevitable question comes next. Well, what are terms? Well, sir, it's as simple as this. All we do is we agree on three things. First is a purchase price, second is a monthly payment, and third is a timeline. We make you that agreed upon monthly payment every single month until the end of that timeline, and then at that point, we're going to cash you out for the purchase, the remaining balance of the purchase price minus any payments that we made to date. By the way, throughout the whole period of time, we take on any and all responsibilities that have to do with that property. Any maintenance, any management of any tenants, taxes, insurance, evictions, anything that you can think of. It's all on us. All you do, Mr. Seller, is you kick your feet up and you collect your check in the mail every single month. It's mailbox money. That's all it is. Huh, okay, well, that's interesting. Ultimately, what we arrived on is a purchase price of $75,150. If I were to give a cash offer for this property, it probably would have been somewhere around $50-ish thousand, 55 maybe if I was really pushing it. So I was able to offer, let's just call it $20,000 more by going seller financing. He had this property under rented for only $750 a month. And so after taxes and insurance, he was netting about $500 a month. So I told him, like, well, I can give you the $500 again, right? What if I got you the $500 without the responsibility? He loved that. And then the timeline, this was a shorter timeline. He only did 5 years. Ideally, I like to get these as long as I possibly can. I mean, if they'll do it for 30 years, that is a dream scenario, right? Sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 10 or 8. In this case, it was 5. The way that we figure out the timeline is, and maybe I can go into this deeper on a different video, but what you want to do is take a look at the purchase price, and then you want to figure out how much principal are we paying down over time. So in this case, what I did was I started with $75,150, and I subtracted from that 5 years, so that's 60 months, and then $500 monthly payments. So 60 times 500, that means we're paying down $30,000 over this period of time. So at the end of that balloon, at the end of 60 months, I'm going to owe $45,150. So the question I had to ask myself was, okay, when I get to that point, 5 years in the future, and I owe that much on it, can I exit the property and make money? For me, the answer is yes. I'm willing to pay $55,000 for cash for it today. So fast forwarding 5 years, you're telling me I can buy it for 45, or I can flip it, or I can refinance it. For me, that's a deal all day long. Okay. So what I have here is a couple snippets from my conversation with him where he raised the two objections. He raised the objection about the down payment, and he raised the objection about the interest. So let's dive into this real quick here.
Do you make down payments, or do you just draw up contracts and start making payments, or how does that work?
Yeah, we usually draw up contracts and just start making payments. I mean, we don't do down payments. Typically what we do instead, because usually the people that we work with in these arrangements, if you think of the people it'd be ideal for, they're just interested in netting the most they possibly can out of the sale, and they're not in any kind of dire need for the cash. So what we do is instead of doing a down payment, we just jack up the purchase price, and then we go about doing it that way.
Just pay more on the back end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Never heard anything about a down payment again. So we got into this with no down payment.
I guess you'd be paying me interest on the balance. Is that how that works?
Yeah.
You figure out a payment?
Again, I mean, it's kind of one half dozen of the other. You know, some people prefer to have interest on the payments, which is totally fine. We got no problem doing interest on the payments. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll set up principal-only payments where there's no interest. And what we'll do is, once again, just raise the purchase price instead. That way the seller doesn't have to report any interest income on any of those payments when it comes tax time. You know,
That
it's
might
kind
be
of
interesting. Yeah.
Never heard about interest again. Boom. So, as of today, that house that I bought for $75,000, current balance owed $70,150. That's actually outdated now. Probably owe about 67, give or take. The approximate value is $120,000 as is. The values in the neighborhood have actually kind of shot up. There were some really favorable comps that sold in between the time that I got this, that I closed on this and today. So that was kind of just fortunate timing with appreciation. Cash flow, net cash flow after management, after maintenance, after all that kind of stuff is $350 a month. My total cash in the deal was just the closing cost of $792.39. That comes out to a cash on cash return of about 530%. Equity is give or take $50,000. And then there at the end, we talked about this on the last slide, but the amount that I'm going to owe at the end of the balloon, which is at the end of 5 years after closing on the property, is $45,150. And that is all. So I will end it there with that. If you have any questions on any of this, if you want to reach out, if you want to connect, the best place to find me is either interact in the comments or hit me up on Instagram at HomeBuyerTyler. Everyone, have a blessed rest of your day. Goodbye.